As soon as his foot touched the wooden threshold, he was enveloped by a silence as heavy as fog. Sami stood before the door of an abandoned apartment in an old quarter of the city, surrounded by the smell of dampness and the chill of dark walls. He had received a lost letter from a colleague bearing this very address, with a cryptic note, "This door will open a gateway to the truth." He glanced around before pushing the door. In the house's wide hallway, a rusted plaque hung above his head, bearing a name from a bygone era, Hana's balcony. He didn't dwell on it. His tension grew with each step toward a dilapidated room at the end of the corridor. The moment he nudged the door open, he was shocked by a sight he'd never expected. At a rickety table sat an old man with a dignified air, but lost, wandering eyes. The old man looked at Sami as though he had known him forever. In a hoarse whisper, barely audible, he said, "At last, you've come." Sami straightened, a cold shudder running through his bones. He'd never met this old man before. For a moment, he struggled to regain his composure. In a trembling voice, he asked, "Who are you? And how did you know I was coming here?" The old man sighed, then pointed to a chair across from him. Sami sat, almost involuntarily, and the old man spoke in a strangely calm tone. "I've heard the echo of your footsteps for years. You may not believe it, but I've been waiting for you." A look of astonishment lingered on Sami's face. He couldn't make sense of this riddle. He surveyed the room, noticing piles of scattered papers on the table and underneath it, some so old that yellowed with time. One thick notebook caught his eye, its cover stamped with a bold title, Hana's Memoirs. He wondered what connection it might have to the so-called Hana's balcony. The old man stretched out a trembling hand to the notebook, opening it precisely to a marked page. He read from it in a frail, rasping voice. "On a rainy evening many years ago, I stood on my balcony. I witnessed a fateful moment that changed my life. I saw a child tumble from the top of a stone staircase, and instead of rushing to help him, I remained frozen, seized by an inexplicable terror." Sami felt his heart pounding. Something within him stirred at these words. Why did this story resonate so deeply? The old man continued, "That incident later taught me how easily we can be swept away by fear, and how fear makes us silent partners in tragedy. But time, cunning as it is, brings our stories back to us in new forms." He stopped reading and closed the notebook gently, as though folding away a piece of his heart. Fixing his gaze on Sami, he said, "I know you went through a similar experience, perhaps even more distressing." Suddenly, a memory blazed to life in Sami's mind. In his childhood, he had witnessed a tragic accident in his own neighborhood on a stone staircase that matched this very description. His closest friend was trapped between life and death, yet Sami stood there, stunned instead of running for help. That haunting image had pursued him ever since, carved into his unconscious mind like an indelible mark. Sami lowered his gaze to the floor, mumbling in a barely audible voice, "I was just a kid back then, but I've been carrying a crushing guilt. I don't know why I froze. I fled the way people flee from their own ghosts, taking refuge in forgetting. The old man gave a sad smile and said, "There is no true escape. Life is made of circles that bring us back time and again, to that same point, to the moment of deafening silence." He slowly rose and walked toward a window. Hidden behind a heavy curtain, he pulled the curtain aside. A tiny balcony stood there. No chair, no plant. It looked as though it had lost its very essence of being a balcony. Pointing toward it, he whispered, "This is Hana's balcony, my balcony. If I could turn back time, I would have jumped from here to save that child, and perhaps saved myself in the process." An awful realization sank into Sami. All the alienation and self-doubt he had suffered might stem from that bitter moment. He had spent years ignoring it, trying to suppress it, believing there was no purpose in confronting the past. And now, he felt that this old man was a living embodiment of his own deepest fears, as if fate had decided to confront him directly with the truth. Slowly, Sami looked up at the old man and asked in a shaking voice, "Can I make amends for what happened, or is it too late?" The old man remained silent. Instead, he pointed to some papers on the edge of the table. Notes describing a charitable drive, one final attempt at doing something truly meaningful to repair the scars of regret. Sami read about a fundraising effort to set up a medical clinic in the very neighborhood where the accident had taken place all those years ago. His hands began to tremble. Perhaps this was his long-awaited chance to do something, however small, to confront the past instead of running from it. While Sami was absorbed in reading, he heard something roll behind him. He turned to see the old man collapsing to the floor, his cane clattering away. Sami rushed to catch him before he hit the ground. Tears glistened silently in the old man's eyes, and he spoke in a voice steeped in sorrow. "I was partially paralyzed after that incident. I can't walk on my own anymore. Nobody knows this but these walls. I stayed here, waiting for someone who could either inherit this burden or face it." Sami's breath quickened as he tried to support the old man, feeling the trembling in those frail arms resonate in his own heart. He mustered a consoling smile. "You're not alone, and I won't be alone anymore. I'll carry this weight and turn it into a way to pay back part of what I owe." No sooner had Sami spoken than the old man's face contorted and his spine curved as if relieved of a hidden load. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm only an old man in your eyes. I'm the reflection of what you let grow inside you through the years. I am the shadow of your guilt." His smile faded, and with it, part of his presence. Sami felt the room enveloped by a swirling fog. He reached out to grab the old man, but his hands grasped only air. It was as though he had been living through a long nightmare or vision that had ended in a sudden flash of realization, moments or minutes. Later, he snapped back to consciousness to find himself sitting on the floor of an empty room, utterly devoid of furniture or any sign of the old man. The window was covered by a tattered curtain, the balcony deserted as if it had remained unused for decades. There was no Hana's remorse, nor any sign of the charitable papers. Yet, the letter that led him here was still in his pocket. With shaking fingers, he opened it to read a few lines scrawled in an old-fashioned script. When you return to that first moment of helplessness, don't hide in the darkness. Move forward, free yourself through action. Sami left the apartment in a trance, as though a cloud were following him. Along the way, one question echoed in his mind. What was real, and what was just a shadow of my soul? He realized that clinging to blame and regret had kept his spirit in chains. And that redemption lay not in fleeing the past, but in transforming it into a driving force to save himself and others. That very night, Sami resolved to launch a genuine fundraiser for a medical project in the same impoverished neighborhood where he'd experienced his childhood trauma. It wouldn't change the past, but it might spare other children from suffering a similar fate. In that way, amid the fragments of guilt and fear, a new meaning for life could emerge. Sometimes, truth comes in the form of a nightmare or a frail old man. But when it confronts us with the present, it teaches us that salvation begins with a simple choices. Never turn your back on remorse. Transform it instead into a light that illuminates our extinguished balconies.